Welcome one and all to my third review of Yu-Gi-Oh! For those of you who just don't remember or who haven't seen the previous reviews, this is a chapter-by-chapter review of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, focusing on the differences between the manga and the anime, as well as the general absurdities of Yugi's universe. Because the universe in which these stories take place is ridiculous. And I mean that in the best possible way. In my last review, we took a look at one of the, I think, least impressive chapters of the entire series, featuring probably the most forgettable villain in the entire franchise. So this review, we're actually going to be taking a look at the chapter from the perspective of whether or not this chapter does things any better. At least partially. The chapter we'll be looking at today is called Heartbeat, which I imagine is a pun on heartbeat. You'll see why I think that later on. And as you can see here on the title page, we have Yugi, Janochi, and Anzu, and a fourth character that we've never seen before. Could this be a new addition to Yugi's circle of friends? Well, let's see. He's small, and weak and unimpressive looking, and, well, Yugi's circle of friends is already overflowing with those traits, so I don't think so. But let's read ahead and find out. The chapter actually starts out with the introduction of this character. His name is Hanasaki. He's a minor Yu-Gi-Oh! Character. They pop up from time to time and then swiftly disappear once the manga finds its narrative direction later on. I kind of imagine that early on Kazuki Takahashi wanted to create this wide array of characters filling up Yugi's school and really fleshing them out, but he just did a terrible job of it. First of all, the characters who go to Yugi's school fall into three categories: Yugi and his friends, pathetic weaklings, and huge muscular thugs. There are very few female characters, and if I'm not mistaken, the only named female student is Anzu herself. And overall, the majority of characters are treated incredibly unsympathetically. They either have one or two defining characteristics that are latched onto throughout their entire portrayal, or they aren't even that lucky. Hanasaki here falls into the category of pathetic losers. Heck, even Yugi, as he bumps into Hanasaki on the bus on the way to school, points out how much of a loser Hanasaki is, and this is coming from Yugi Moto, the biggest loser in manga history. He even admits it right here. Yugi acknowledges the fact that he's a loser and points out that Hanasaki is almost as much of a loser as he is. It's just a fact. These characters accept it. I mean, look at Hanasaki here. Yugi tries to talk to him, and he actively ignores him. Yugi is too much of a loser, even for this loser to acknowledge. And Yugi does nothing to change opinions in this scene when the bus suddenly stops. He is thrown, not forward as you would expect, but backwards to the back of the bus. Because not even the law of inertia wants to acknowledge this kid. And this is where the plot of the chapter finds Yugi. In the back of the bus that he rides every day, and he should probably know everyone who's on it every day, Yugi is surprised to find another student from the school. His name is Sozoji, but that's really hard to say, so I'm going to be calling him Phallic Hair. Phallic Hair is listening to music on a boombox with headphones, but he has the music turned up so loud that it is intolerable to anyone within 10 feet of him. So, unsurprisingly, Yugi finds that he and Phallic Hair are the only two people in the entire back of the bus. Yugi knows this guy, and apparently he's pretty infamous for pretty much latching on to anyone nearby and forcing himself upon them, so Yugi tries to run away before he's seen, but he isn't so lucky. Jeez, not even luck wants to acknowledge this kid. So Phallic Hair insists that Yugi sit with him, and starts going on and on about some karaoke performance that he wants to put on. Apparently he does this a lot, and apparently Yugi has been subject to this quite a bit himself. These karaoke sessions apparently go on all night. Phallic Hair expects you to pay your way in to the karaoke hall yourself, and he seems to routinely draft other students into selling tickets to the event for him. And there is some, at this point, unnamed consequence to failing in your duties in this case. They don't come right out and say it, but you can guess at this point that it is some form of physical abuse. But, of course, as we've already established, the police in this universe only respond to card game-related crimes, so there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do about it. Unfortunately for Yugi, Phallic Hair drafts him to sell 10 tickets to the event. Now, Yugi does have some friends at this point, so there is a chance he could convince some of them to buy these tickets, even though the event is apparently going to be absolutely atrocious. But as we have also established throughout this review series, Yugi is so good in saccharine that his blood tastes like sugar water, so he just can't bring himself to do that. So he wanders the school like a little lost puppy, trying desperately to find someone who he can subject to Phallic Hair's torturous singing voice. And he stumbles upon Hanasaki. And all joking aside, this is where we see a really good example of what makes Yugi a very, very good character. And I mean good in the sense that he's well written, and good in the sense that he's just such a genuinely good person. He doesn't know Hanasaki very well. They're not friends. He has no reason to be overly sympathetic towards this person, and yet he still can't bring himself to try to sell Hanasaki a ticket. In fact, he chastises himself for even thinking about it. But surprise, surprise, Hanasaki has also been drafted by Phallic Hair into selling tickets, and he tries to sell one to Yugi. And Yugi is so sympathetic of this kid that he takes all of the tickets. He agrees to sell them for him, so that Hanasaki will not have to bear the consequence, whatever that consequence should be. Because it's pretty clear at this point that these tickets aren't getting sold. But little does Yugi know, Phallic Hair was watching. He saw Hanasaki try to take the easy way out. And so Hanasaki will have to suffer the consequences. Dun dun dun! And so Yugi shows up to the karaoke event entirely alone and apologizes profusely for not being able to sell any tickets. He intends to stay all night and listen to every single one of Phallic Hair's songs and applaud and go through the motions and make the guy feel all good and warm and fuzzy inside. Not in that way. Get your head out of the gutter, people. Just so that no one else will have to suffer through it instead. Have I mentioned how just genuinely good a person Yugi is? Now at this point, Yugi thinks of Phallic Hair as a pushy but genuinely harmless guy who just doesn't know that people hate his singing voice. It's pretty clear at this point that the consequence to not selling the tickets is just having to suffer through the event yourself. Why Yugi can't just leave, we don't know. However, Yugi's opinion of the guy starts to change when Phallic Hair straps him into a pair of headphones, turns his microphone up to full volume, and then blasts his voice directly into Yugi's freaking brain. And it doesn't get much better when Yugi discovers that Hanasaki is at the karaoke hall as well, and that he's been, he's a small character in Yu-Gi-Oh! He got beat up. There's no two ways about it. At least I'm assuming he got beat up and that Phallic Hair's voice isn't so bad that it actually did physical damage to this kid, aside from his eardrums. And here again we see another example of how good a person Yugi is. When it was just Phallic Hair being horrible to him, he would have sat there and taken it. But now that Phallic Hair has hurt another person, a person who Yugi didn't even know that well, remember that, he loses it. And he transforms, and the other Yugi comes out. And as per usual, he initiates a game between himself and Phallic Hair that is themed after the situation. He calls it the Silent Game, and the rules are that they will sit across the room from each other with these little dancing clown toys near each of them, which will start to dance if any sound is made on their respective half of the room. And as we usually do early on, we actually see the game from the perspective of Phallic Hair, not from other Yugi. I always loved this writing trick in these early chapters because it kept the other Yugi mysterious while giving us some perspective into the villainous character. And considering how fleshed out these early villains were, this is really the only character development for them that we ever got. In this case, we see that Phallic Hair thinks he's already won the game. The other Yugi, when he appeared, made a big show of things by ripping the cord for the headphones he was wearing right out of the speaker, and the headphone jack just happened to catch itself on the lip of a glass sitting on the table near Yugi. It's teetering there. It's going to fall at any moment, and it is going to fall near enough to the dancing clown toy on Yugi's side of the room that it will set off the toy, and Yugi will lose the game. It's a very coincidental setup, but it serves its purpose. Phallic Hair notices that the headphone jack is going to fall and that he is going to win, and it starts to pump him up. His heart starts beating faster and faster, and that is what loses him the game. He never put down the microphone that he had been holding, and if you recall, he had had the volume turned up all the way. And so as his heart beats faster and faster, the microphone actually picks that up, the sound of his heartbeat comes out of the speakers on his side of the room, his clown dances, and he loses the game, and that is the weirdest sentence I've ever had to string together in my entire life. Of course, upon losing, Phallic Hair is subject to a penalty game, which is incidentally where the title of this chapter comes in, because Yugi subjects him to the penalty game Beat Festival, which causes the sound of his own heartbeat to magnify and resonate in his ears for an undetermined period of time. At which point Yugi leaves Phallic Hair there and presumably helps the injured Hanasaki back home. And this is, I don't even know what to say about this one. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a really, really weird franchise. Especially these early manga chapters are frequently just bizarre. And yet this one, in terms of that weirdness, is just a step above the rest. The game that is played here is entirely nonsensical. The penalty game doesn't seem based upon the failings of the villainous character as it typically does. And overall, Phallic Hair, fine, I'll call him Sozoji for the wrap-up, while he's a jerk, and it's definitely true that he did hurt somebody, doesn't seem as bad as some of these other guys. Realize the fact that he was subjected to a penalty game means that the game that he and Yugi were playing was a shadow game. And yet Yugi won almost by accident. In a typical shadow game, Sozoji's true colors would have shown through, and he would have just had to make a sound. He would have had to start singing or something to show that he was just so narcissistic that he couldn't help but inflict himself on other people. Instead, he loses by accident because he forgot to turn the microphone off. This guy's true colors were shown in a shadow game, showing that he was a normal guy. Again, I get that he beat up a guy. I get that. And that's definitely not good, but the behaviors of the characters up until that point suggested that this is something he had never done before, that he had just gotten particularly frustrated in this instance, and he took it out on this guy. Which again, is not a good thing. But the other characters that we have seen so far were Ushio, who is a complete jerk, who regularly beats up people and takes money from them, and a TV producer who regularly victimizes people to boost the ratings of his show. This guy is just a moderately self-centered high school kid who can't admit to himself that he has a bad singing voice. And yet that makes him deserving of a penalty game where now he won't be able to hear anything but his own heartbeat for, I'm assuming, the rest of his life. Since typically a penalty game ends when a lesson is learned, and I honestly don't think this guy has any lesson to learn that is related to this game. I don't even know, guys. I am just floundering here to find some way to string all of the nonsensicality in this chapter together. If last chapter was bland and forgettable, this chapter at least outshines that chapter in being much more memorable, but only in so much that you find it coming back to mind because you find yourself continually trying to make sense of it. The game was lame and convoluted, and the villain, while definitely more interesting than the villain from last chapter, and definitely more developed, was just a weak character. Which puts me in an interesting predicament, because I have said several times now that I really like the early Yu-Gi-Oh manga, and now 2 out of 3 of the chapters that I've reviewed have been, well, let's just call it like it is. They've been shit. Fortunately, however, that pattern is not going to hold for long, because next chapter is one of my personal favorites. This has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.